So, hello. Some of you have been asking whether I would do some videos showing how I glaze my pieces. And honestly, that always just sort of seemed a little bit problematic for a few different reasons. However, I have thought it over and I thought, well, the easiest piece for me to really cover a whole bunch of bases as far as glazing and the crawl glazes would be the flower bowl series, which are these. There's quite a few different styles that I do with this, but today I'm going to throw this form. With this video, I'm going to take you through all the different steps in its process till we end up with a bowl somewhat like this with the layered up crawl glazes. After you've practiced a few times doing this technique, then you can start to branch out with your glazing. For instance, this bowl here is done with a crawl glaze over top of a shiny glaze. Now, this is a terra sigillata, and when you're putting a crawl glaze over top of a terra sigillata that's just been low fired, it's a much easier application because there's a lot, the absorbency is easy, it's sucking up the glaze. Whereas when you're putting it on top of a glazed surface, it's a bit more of a challenge. So I'm not going to be showing you this. This is sort of something for you to work up to, but lots of different possibilities. This bowl here is another one from my flower series, and this has a base drop of the black terra sigillata, which you see here. This is a recipe I got online. It's basically cedar height red arts clay and then some oxides mixed in, and it's a very common black slip, so you can find the recipe easily. So this slip is brushed on this piece, and then the crawl glaze has been applied, the purple one, and it's been fired, and then the white crawl glaze was poured in the interior here and sprayed lightly on the outer edge and then fired again. So that's how that one was done. I won't go over how this was done because I'm going to actually demonstrate that. But how about we go and throw a bowl to start? Got 6.5 pounds of clay here. I'll just get it centered and off we go. Keep it centered. Now, the flower bowl, I always leave a little bit more depth at the bottom for the center part of the bowl because it's going to be a slight curve like this. All will be revealed. Let me see, how much room am I leaving down there? Okay, got it that thick. That's plenty. So now I'm just going to pull it apart a little bit. Left the extra thickness there because once I pull this up, we're going to make that nice little dish be the petal part of the flower. So we need a little extra depth. So now I'm going to start pulling up and out. Now, one thing I find problematic when I get to the glazing stage of this form is if there are any throwing rings, they really show if you're making a pattern on the bowl. So I'm really mindful of all the way along taking out the rings as much as I can. So now I'm going for my second pull. Now that's pretty good, nice and thick. So now I'm gonna tear my rim. So whip it good. You usually end up doing this a couple of times, depending. That's good enough for our first start. Okay. Now I'm gonna go back and do another pull. Now you can see I really had to grab the clay there, so there's those pesky rings, which I didn't actually mean to get quite as pronounced, but be that as it may. Sometimes do this while you're trying to take those rings out. Just give yourself a little bit of support on the outside while you're pressing and basically carving the clay away.
And I find that often, once I get to this stage, just very calmly, slowly going down from the top will help work those rings out. It's almost like you're pressing a little clay into it. But you have to be really cautious, because if you're too thin at this point, you know what's going to happen. You're going to collapse your bowl. The best thing is not to have too many throwing rings to start with, but clearly I did not succeed at that point. So there we go. So now I've got the basic shape without too many rings. Take those out a bit more. Now I want to make the center part of the flower. And because we have that extra clay at the bottom, it's really quite easy to make a nice little dish there. And then go back, bring this down a little bit. Let's tidy that up. And there's the center part. All done. Okay, let's see what the thickness is now. Be interesting to see how much we ended up going down. I don't think we went down that much. Oh my Lord, no. There's still lots of clay there. Okay, so I still have almost as much clay as when I started, but that's okay because we can trim that out nicely. You want to have extra anyhow for the foot so you can give the piece a nice lift. I'm going to go for my final pull. I'm looking at my torn edge, and at this point in time, if I want to do more to it, this would be when I'm doing it. But it's actually looking pretty good. So even an old perfectionist like me is actually relatively happy with that. I'm going to keep my fingers as flat as I can on the inside so I don't make more rings, and my focus is going to be on flaring it out as much as possible. Notice I don't have the wheel going at the speed of light. I'm just curving up a little bit there to get my rim the way I want it. It's looking better. Feeling pretty happy with that. This is a raku clay body, so it can take a lot of abuse. This is actually Seattle Potter Supplies raku clay body. I also use Laguna Industrial Raku, which is a really nice clay body to work with as well, either or. And often I like to mix a little bit of WSO in for plasticity, about 20%, but that's because I have a pug mill and I can do all those things. I'm going to take the rings out again. Say clay is starting to feel like it's going to slump on me. At this point I could stop, because don't want to lose the bowl, and come back when put it back on the wheel when it's firmed up a bit, and deal with the rings then when it's sort of leather hard. But I'm pretty sure I can get away with it, so I'm going to do the best I can to take those rings out. Move to a slightly smaller rib. Put my hand on the outside there for support. I'm going to do one more from the top. Know when to call a halt. It's time to stop before I make a boo-boo. Let's seal up the clay. Okay, so don't forget, if you're feeling a little panicky at this point, just stop and do this when it's set up a little bit, because you don't actually need to do it now. You can wait. And prep for trimming. Cut line. Now I'm going to cut it through. So there's step one. The bowl is made. Now I'm going to show you how we trim these. I threw this yesterday, a little bit smaller bowl, probably only about 5 pounds wet, and I have a nice piece of foam. Just going to put on that to protect that torn rim, like so. Okay, beauty. And there's that bit that I cut through, so it doesn't leave as much. Trim. I think that's pretty good. So you remember that we've got a little bit extra thickness here, so don't be too concerned about going through it, because you've got a nice heavy bottom, so you can trim a nice base. I always think that the bottom of the vessel is really an important part, that it sometimes gets a little overlooked. And really, a nicely turned foot is what is kind of the pedestal that your
your vessel is standing on.
And always remember to bevel your edge. Really helps with the bottoms, the foot not getting chipped over time as people, you know, don't lift it straight up. And the bowl, kind of rock it. There, I think we've got a really nice curve. Let's see. Yep, looks good to me. Now seal up the torn surface with Michael Sherrill's beautiful mud tools. I know I'm always waxing on about these tools, but really, they are just lovely.
I just have to go over this a few extra times because that raku clay is really gritty. So I've got a few little tears there. I'm trying to seal up.
All done for this stage. Just one important detail left.
The all-important signature. Oh, there we go. Careful flip. Voila! So now this is going to dry, and then when it's bone dry is when I apply the terra sig, which I'm going to show you now. I've already put one layer of the terra sig on here because sometimes I find if I put on enough all at the first go of this terra sig to make it black enough, if I'm not careful and if it's a little thin up here, I can get some cracks. So I just do an initial layer and then let it sit. One thing I've discovered about the terra sig is that it's very unforgiving for fingerprints. When you go to pick this up afterwards, like when you've got the slip on there already, sometimes your fingerprints can show. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna leave putting the final layer of this till after I've done the outside. I'm just gonna gently turn it over on top of a chuck. So now I'm putting this sigillata on, and when you're working with sigillata at first, it's quite a learning curve. There's all sorts of things that can go wrong. You can have the sigillata a bit too thin, you can have it a little bit too thick. You find you haven't brushed it on enough and the clay color is showing through. So really careful observation rather, patience with yourself, and just know that it's a learning curve. And I have been doing this for like how long? And I'm still making mistakes with sigillata. Now this is fairly thick. So I think I'm probably only gonna need about 4 layers. I'm not seeing the clay shining through, so I think I'm good enough. I have this bottle of water and I'm always using it to rinse my brush out in, so there's a bit of the brown sig in there, and I want a little bit more water in my last coat, so I've rinsed my brush out, so I know my brush is holding a bit more water now, and I'm giving it one more coat. So it's just a little bit thinner, and it's going to make it nicer to polish. It can be really deceptive with this slip. You think you've got enough, and then it comes out of the kiln, and you're like, oh God, I can see the clay coming through. And that really, nothing chokes my oats more than that. I'm like, oh God, beginner's mistake, age 63, still making beginner's mistakes. I'm not that great at self-forgiveness for my beginner's mistakes. So there we go. Now, quick like bunny, you get a little Swiffer. Wait until that's dry. This is how you get that nicely burnished surface. So you notice I'm waiting until I can see that dampness is gone. because otherwise it'll just end up grabbing on this. Okay, so now I've buffed the outside, so this is pretty much done. You could let this sit for a little bit because the clay is a little bit damp and you want that to dry out more. Notice how I'm not touching that surface. Okay, so I'm just careful and down. Every time you're making a mistake and you're feeling bad about yourself, just remember me saying, that I have learned the hard way over and over again, because I seem to make mistakes more than once. So now it's all done and it's ready to go in the kiln. I'm going to put it on a bat so I can carry it to the kiln room on that, and then when I go to put it in the kiln, I'm once again going to use these. Pick it up and there. So next time you see this, I'll have taken it out of the kiln and we'll be putting the first layer of glaze on it. Alrighty, so we're back to the flower bowls. They've come out of the kiln with their first layer of the black slip on, and I was just going to do one glaze combo for you, and then I realized that if I did two with two different combinations of crawl glazes, I could better illustrate how the crawl glazes react to the oxides that you put in them. So I'm doing two. So this one, I'm going to put my green crawl. All these recipes and more information on how to use and fire them is in my book, My Life as a Potter. So you can, all the extra tips are in there. But in the meantime, I'm putting the green crawl with 6% copper oxide in as the first layer. So I'm going to put a thick layer for the flower center. Then once I've done that, I've got my glaze in a handy little icing thing. You can get these at kitchen stores. So I have the glaze in there, and then I'm going to do the first layer of the patterns. So now the trick is how much glaze to put in the center, because you don't want to have to scoop it out. So it's a bit of a guessing game. Glazing is a lot like cooking. It's instinct. So I can already see that there's a good chance that I was going to say that I don't have quite enough, but oh my God, look at that. And the more you work with these glazes, you kind of get a sense for how thick to go. The beautiful thing about doing these on a bowl form, they're not going to flake off onto your kiln shelf. Because obviously when you're doing them on an upright form and that crawl glaze starts to shrink, it can pop off. It can pop off when it's drying. It can pop off in the kiln. Basically, they're temperamental, kind of like me sometimes. I write about that in the book. Not me being temperamental, about the glazes. Okay, so now that's setting up nicely. Now, usually I do this over the sink in the studio, but that wouldn't make as pretty a shot for you, so I'm gonna do it here. Okay, so there's sweep number one. Turn it around. Now I'm gonna have to practice self-forgiveness, because of course when I'm on camera I never do as well as when I'm just winging it by myself. Whoops. Okay, so now that's the first layer. Now you can see how I've got it thicker in some spots, but I know from experience that going over and getting it a little bit thicker is going to be better. So I'm going back and I'm going to do another scoot through, and I'm trying to follow the lines that I already put there. There we go. Okay, last one. Whoops. Okay, so now we've got all sorts of different thicknesses happening. I'm gonna put just another little bit extra glaze right in the middle there. And I'm gonna just coax that. I'm gonna try coax that around a little bit. There we go, just so we get a little bit of variety. Because, you know, everything looks completely centered and everything in nature, but it isn't necessarily so. I think I like that. So now this is just going to dry, and then it's going to go back in the kiln for another firing. I bisque fired it to 06. My next firing is going to be 06 as well, keeping it low. And then when it comes out and we put the next layer of glaze on it, that final firing will be 05. Okay, so that's the green glaze. Now I'm going to show you the purple blue glaze next, because it has cobalt in it as a colorant and it shrinks very differently. All right, so this is my blue/purple crawl glaze. Like I say, this is like glazing is, you go on your instincts, and this is a new batch of glaze, and I can already tell I've got a little bit more water than I'd like in here, so it's a little runnier, which means it's going to shrink differently. So I am going to pour the glaze and then probably go over it a couple of times and try and get it thicker. So there's my, yeah, you can see how much quicker that one is going around, even with just that first little pour there, compared to the green crawl, which was just that much thicker. So we already know we're gonna need to put a bit more in here. Alrighty. Oops. It's not a very assertive pour. Okay. Now I'm just gonna let that set for 1 sec. Okay. I think I can get away with turning it. Now you can see the difference having too much water in the glaze is making to my pour. So, well, in a way this is good because it shows you, A, I'm not perfect. Well, I think you all know that already. But it also gives you clues as to what to watch for. Okay, let's do the next one. Oh, geez. There went a little splat. Okay. So we're definitely going to go over this a few times because we already know it's not thick enough. And it's not looking that exciting to me. So I'm going to go to town and just give it a lot more glaze. There we go. Now you can see how, because the glaze is running, it's runnier, it's moving into the flower center. So that's not going to be the end of the world because we're going to put another glaze over top of this, but it does change how the end product is. Like I'm saying now is not going to be my finest hour, but I've said that before and then looked at a pot after it's come out and gone, oh my god, you're fabulous. So when this happens, I let them run and then I'll put a little dab in the middle, join the runs up. So see how I just kind of coaxed it. I coaxed it all in. And I'm gonna let that sit for a couple of minutes and then I might put a little bit more on, but I think for today, to teach you, that's probably enough. Next time you see me, these are gonna be out of the kiln, ready for their next layer of glaze. So here we are back again. Both the bowls have gone through the firing process to 06. I did too, to show you how the oxides react differently, and I'm really glad I did because this bowl turned out so nicely that I really don't want to put another layer of glaze on it. I think it's finished. So this is the copper. Roughly about 6% copper carbonate in my basic white crawl glaze. The recipe's in my book, but without the Zirco pack. So basically the crawl glaze base with 6% copper. Notice how the cobalt carbonate has responded really differently. First off, this would have been a bit thicker than this, but I never get the copper beating up. It's always flatter platelets, whereas when you put the cobalt in, cobalt's more of a flux, so I presume that's why. I'm no scientist, believe it or not. So I don't actually know, but I'm presuming that that's why the cobalt beads up like that. Very, very different, eh? Same base glaze, very different textural reaction. So we're gonna leave that as it is, because we're very happy with it. Now this one, I'm gonna put some white crawl here, let it thicken up a bit, and then I'll do the splash once again over the top. This is always a bit of a guess as to how much glaze to put in there, because obviously you don't really want to be pouring it out. So I'm going to want it fairly thick. Go like that. I can always add a bit. And then I just gently, bye. Those big bumps are, oi! Meaning that it's just not flowing as smoothly as it could. Call these Fox side effects. Oi! I want to go up to that line, but I don't want to go over. I think this one's going to turn out really quite cool. Good. So now I'm going to do the squirt, squirt, squirt. Have to wait a second because you don't want it to just run all over the place. I did not get a very nice sweep there. Not quite sure what was happening. Well, let's hope for better this time. It's always a little odd when you're demonstrating. All right, so then you see how it's already drying and setting up there. You want to let it set a little bit, and then I'm going to give it another layer. So right now, trying to smoothly go over where I've already been. Emphasis on trying. This is a fairly deep bowl. It's not as shallow, which does make it a little bit more challenging. So now we're all done. It's going to go in the kiln, fired for its final time. Hopefully it looks magnificent and not unmagnificent. Okay, bye for now. Oh wow, okay, so this turned out pretty cool. I can see that I went pretty thick on the white crawl here because it's separated a lot, and you can see these gaps in between. Looking at this now, I'm thinking I might be tempted to do one more firing on this and put the purple crawl in here, not quite as thick, and then what'll happen is it'll go into these black crevices and be a brighter purple sort of poking out through that, and then you'll have these tones as well. So I think that might make it just a little bit more dynamic. So I'm pretty sure I'm going to do that. These turned out quite nicely, as you see. Everything worked. The great thing about these glazes is if you go a little too thick, oh well, not the end of the world. Go a little too thin, that's a bit more of an issue. But you just play, and that's how you learn. So this is the end of the video. I hope you've enjoyed it. And if you want to learn more about me and the glaze recipes and more techniques, they're all in my book, My Life as a Potter, which is a fundraiser for my legacy project. So I hope you buy it and pot on. Oh, and explore and experiment. Okay, bye.